On Life and Meaning is brought to you by Blumenthal Performing Arts, celebrating its 25th year presenting the best in the performing arts, sharing and employing the arts as a major catalyst to strengthen education, building community cohesiveness, and advancing economic growth. Further support is provided by Charlotte Mecklenburg Library, one of America's leading urban public libraries, delivering exceptional services and programs with a mission to improve lives and build a stronger community. And by the Arts and Science Council, Charlotte Mecklenburg's resource hub and lead advocate for the regional cultural community, providing culture for all.
I guess I want more of the things that I love. I want more time with the people I love. I want there to be more books within me. I want to keep writing. If I could keep sort of everything the way it is now. Of course, we all evolve and change, and I want to see my children grow, but no, I mean, there's nothing that I feel is missing right now. But there's a great fear in that too, right? Because I keep saying to my kids things like, these are the good old days. Right? And I'm so nostalgic and I'm so worried about time passing by that in some ways that's what I want. I want things to go by a little more slowly.
Emily Giffin is the author of 8 New York Times best-selling novels: Something Borrowed, Something Blue, Baby Proof, Love the One You're With, Heart of the Matter, Where We Belong, The One and Only, and First Comes Love. Her most recent novel is All We Ever Wanted. Her books have been translated into 31 languages, with over 11 million copies sold worldwide. In addition, 5 of her novels have been optioned for film or television and are in various stages of development. Her first novel, Something Borrowed, was released as a romantic comedy in 2011, starring Kate Hudson, Ginnifer Goodwin, and John Krasinski. Emily practiced law in New York for several years before being published. In this episode, we explore what her novels are about, commercial success, the pressure she feels, and the life she has led. I'm Mark Paris, and this is On Life and Meaning. Welcome, Emily.
Thank you, Mark.
Great to have you.
It's great to be here.
How do you describe who you are in the world?
Oh, well, you're starting off really easy, softball there. I would say that's a hard question to answer. As I sit here on book tour and talking about my books, and the reason you're meeting with me is because I've just finished a book. The easy answer to say is I'm a writer. I'm a novelist. And I think that's a huge part of my identity. That's something that I've loved and I've been doing since I could write, since I was 6 years old. I remember in the first grade, we had to say, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said an author. But I think really it's a mistake to define ourselves too much by what it is we do for a living. And I'm very mindful of that. And I think that if I had to answer that if I could only give you one answer, I would say I'm a mother, and I'm my husband's wife, and I'm a sister and a daughter, and I try to be a good friend. So I think that we're really defined in the most important ways by the people closest to us and our relationships.
You've written 9 novels.
I have.
How do you think about those novels?
Actually 10. The first one was rejected across the board. So I've written 10.
How do you think of those 10 novels as a body of work?
I write relationship-driven, character-driven stories. So I think that all of them are about people, real people. Well, they're not real, but I try to make them as real to life as I can. And I try to capture the messiness of life, how complicated life can be, how, even when we want it to be black and white, it's not. And I think all of my stories are about people who are essentially good at heart. I think most of us are good people to varying degrees, of course. Some of us are more honest and some of us are more solid, rock solid character. But I think most of us are decent people trying to get it right. And yet we find ourselves in time and again in unsympathetic situations, making the wrong choices. And usually when we do make those decisions, the people we hurt are the ones we care about the most. So I would say that my books are about people and relationships and trying to get it right and trying to find empathy for one another despite our unsympathetic, messy lives.
Emily, your most recent novel, All We Ever Wanted, addresses themes of class and wealth and privilege, which have always been in your previous novels, but in this novel, it seems very much out front.
Mm-hmm.
Did that just happen to be in the lives of the characters, or were you intentional about addressing those themes?
I think more than, I may have touched on them in former books. I have touched on them, but this is the first time it's really become, it was front and center to the story. The first one in 10 where it's been about that. Yet interestingly, I didn't set out to write a book about exploring class or, social class or race or sexism or, this book, I started it before the Me Too movement. So it wasn't that was in my head. I was writing a character driven story about these people, about a woman who has her most deeply held values and what happens to her when those come into conflict with the people she loves the most. That's the story that I wanted to tell. It just so happens that class came into play and race came into play and some of those other things came into play. And as I wrote the book, and I think looking back with hindsight, I would say that certainly the national conversation, the landscape, the months leading up to the election, the election, social class came into play during those months and race, certainly gender and sexism and aftermath with Me Too, all of that came into play. So you're not right in a vacuum. And I think inevitably those things worked their way into the story as they were the things that I was thinking about. They were the things I was discussing with my children. I assume we'll probably get into that a little later, but I have twin sons who were going into the 9th grade. So they were 13 when I started writing the book. They're 14 now. And my daughter's 11, and they certainly, they watch the news. We watch the news together as a family, and we're all very aware of those issues. That I think, I don't think it's a coincidence that this book was written at the beginning in the summer of 2016 and concluded in the January of 2018. I guess, right? I don't think that's a coincidence, but I didn't set out to write a book about those issues. And I never set out to write a book with moral messaging or there's themes I want to explore, but there's not like an ultimate lesson that I want to get to.
Emily, I've noticed a progression in your books to more complicated characters, greater moral ambiguity, greater sensitivity to social issues, and more multiple points of view. Is that a fair reading?
Well, that's certainly a very complimentary reading. I try certainly with each book to reach deeper and tell a more nuanced story. And I think part of it's the journey that I'm going on as a person. When I wrote my first book, I was 29. I was single. I was not a mother, not yet a mother. And now I think the stakes are at 46 and married with 3 children who are growing older in this complicated world. I feel in my own life that the stakes are higher and, the issues are deeper and there's more to explore. So I would hope that my characters have sort of evolved in that way. That said, they remain just very relationship driven stories.
Let's talk about your first novel,
okay.
Something Borrowed.
Sure.
The protagonist, Rachel, when describing her childhood friendship with Darcy, her foil, says, "We preferred cheerful sitcoms." Did you think of the readers of the novel as people who prefer cheerful sitcoms?
That is such a good question. I love that question. Well, I love cheerful sitcoms, but I love the angsty kind of, the angst-driven world of TV and movies and books as well. So I think that we're complicated that way. People are complicated that way. My readers, when they were introduced to Something Borrowed, which was packaged in a certain way at the time, that this chick lit genre had just sort of exploded with Bridget Jones's Diary and The Devil Wears Prada. And I remember writing this book. I wrote it in the aftermath of Something Borrowed. I'm speaking of my first published novel. I wrote it in the aftermath of 9/11. I had the first flight out of New York. I moved to London. I had the very first flight that flew out of JFK on September 16th. So it was a dark time, and I had no friends in London. I wrote, it was rained a lot, and I wrote this, sort of melancholic story of two girls who were friends and both loved and hated each other. And it was a very, I would say, a bittersweet story. I mean, there was hopeful elements to it, but it was also quite heartbreaking. But I think it was packaged in a way because that made sense at the time, with a pink book and a ring on the front, and just great benefits to that marketing. And I think a lot of readers connected with the lighthearted aspects of the story. So in that sense, I don't think that my work has changed so much in tone as one might think if they were only looking at the covers. And I think, like most women, most people, and I think most of my readers, we want both. We want to be entertained, of course. My books are released in the summer. They're great for the beach. But, I hope that they're page turners, which is sort of what you want on the beach. Otherwise, you're just not going to read on the beach. But at the same time, I hope they have deeper layers too. And I think people want that, especially now during such troubled times.
In Something Borrowed, Rachel says, "Stop pondering the meaning of life and start making grocery lists."
Oh my goodness. This is a blast from the past. You probably know this book better than I, having just taken a look at it, and I have not picked it up in years. But
is that your advice for getting on with it?
Well, certainly I think you can overthink. And there's some paralysis that come with that, and you have to be practical. And when you're in your 20s, I think that paralysis happens. Well, it really happened. I shouldn't generalize about age. I think it happens to all of us at various points in our lives. And I think did she say that? Did she say you have to read the quote again? This is like
Rachel saying this.
Rachel
yes.
says,
"Stop pondering the meaning of life and start making grocery lists."
So, yeah, I think at some point you've got to you can't let inertia take hold of you. And that's been a theme in a lot of my books. Again, I don't set out to write necessarily about that, but it's about people asking themselves, am I living the life I'm meant to be living? Am I being true to myself? Am I authentic? And, I don't know that the truth, the answers lie within a grocery list, but certainly we need to be proactive. We need to just keep moving and keep going and not sometimes just overthink and be passive players in our lives. I mean, it's so important not to be a passive player, because I think, like with Rachel in Something Borrowed and Nina in All We Ever Wanted, there was a passivity to where they were at the outset of the story, a life happening to them. Choices, they weren't making choices. Choices were being made sort of for them.
Emily, I'd like to talk to you about living authentically.
Okay.
Do you ever find that you have to project yourself in a certain way as an author? Always camera ready, always grateful, very successful as a best-selling novelist, but always likable enough to drive more sales to your novels?
My friends and I call that #blessed. If you knew me, if we were friends, which I hope we will become, I think we will be, you wouldn't be asking that question, because I'm not always. I'm anxious. I'm an introvert. I tend to, I'm alone a lot of the time. I have, of course, great friends, but, days will go by when I'm writing in my sweats. I don't have to worry about projecting much of anything. I do enjoy social media and Instagram so much. And I feel like the brightest version of myself, the most positive version of myself on Instagram. And I would say that it's not, I'm very authentic on Instagram. I show sort of all sides of things. And, but I'm hopeful that I do have that optimism within me when I look at my Instagram page, not so much when I'm staring at the blank page. But I do think there's the pitfall of worrying too much about how we're perceived and overthinking things. And, I think that when you really want to be liked by everyone, whether it's on your Instagram page or in real life with your friendships and in your, school community, in my case, with my children, you run the risk of sort of having a life that's devoid of deeper meaning. And that's something that I try to remind myself of when I post something that certain readers don't like. When I bring up issues, and, I'm not terribly political on social media, but sometimes I bring up issues that other people read as being political. And there's the sense of maybe I shouldn't go there. Maybe I'm alienating readers. Maybe they, I get the occasional comment, I'll never read one of your books again because you said X, Y, or Z. And the answer to me has to be, that's okay. I'm sorry you feel that way. I'm sorry that you can't separate my viewpoints on this issue from my fictional world, but I understand it. And, I still, in most cases, wish you well. And this is such a minority of people who follow me and my readers. But you can sort of cater to that denominator. If you're, I wouldn't call it the lowest common denominator, but you can cater to the naysayers more and fall into the same thing we're talking about, this risk averse terrain where you don't want to take a stand because you don't want to be disliked.
There is Emily Giffin, the person, and then Emily Giffin, the brand. Do you ever feel like a character in one of your own novels?
Okay. Well, sure. I mean, I think, don't we all sometimes feel like we're playing a role at times in our lives? I think that the key is we are different versions of ourselves, but we have to find the most authentic one, and we have to let that person sort of lead the way. Take the charge, take the lead, so to speak.
Your writers expect you to deliver a certain familiar experience. Does your commercial success limit you as a writer?
I don't think so. I think some of the choices that I've made have probably limited my sales with one title or another. I mean, writing about, in particular, the one and only, which was 2 books ago, a woman falls in love with her best friend's father. Obviously, there's an age gap. It was set in the world of Texas college football. And I don't know if warn's the right word, but I was sort of told from my advisors from the business side of writing, your readers might not like this. And, they might perceive this as, so unconventional that it becomes unsympathetic. Or a better example might even be Baby Proof, which wasn't about babies at all. It was such a regrettable title. I wish it were called, something that tapped into soulmates rather than babies. But, the first line of that book is, I never wanted to be a mother. And I was told, that's so unlikable that people will not like a woman who doesn't want to be a mother. And so I've made those decisions. I've tried to remain I wouldn't call it courageous. That's a little too self-congratulatory. It's a little too extreme in the characterization, but taking risks, being unafraid of risks, and knowing that, okay, maybe readers won't like this, but this is the story that I want to tell, and hoping that readers will connect. Not everyone, maybe fewer, maybe sales won't be as, I won't do as well commercially with this one particular book, but this is a story I want to tell. And interestingly, those are the ones where I find kind of the most avid, loyal, smaller following of thank you for telling this story. I mean, I got so many letters after Baby Proof. I'm a 34-year-old woman. I'm married. I don't want to have children. I'm so sick of being asked the question and being, pigeonholed as cold or all the ways that I feel like it's the last taboo against women in a lot of ways. So I hope that I never, slave to those sorts of concerns of ultimately, like, I want my readers to connect with my books and to enjoy them and to find meaning in them. But, I really don't write with sales figures in mind. I truly don't.
Emily, I do want to talk about the life of the writer that often goes unseen. You are very productive. You are commercially successful. Your books are made into movies. You have notable friends.
Movie, singular.
And others have been optioned.
Okay.
You have supportive friends and a family.
Mm-hmm.
What's the other side of your life?
Well, I think I touched on that earlier. I mean, I'm there's a lot of pressure in writing a book every other year. I mean, I get the question a lot in book signings, and I'm always surprised by it and intrigued by it, but I get the question, how do you find time to write? And I think it's such an interesting question, perhaps because many people do write as a hobby on the side. They're writing a novel, as I did when I was practicing law in Manhattan. I wrote a book, that the one that was ultimately rejected. I wrote that on the side. But commercial writing as an author, a novelist, it's my full-time profession, is still get that question as one that I find so surprising, because it's something I don't think we would ever say to a fourth grade teacher. How do you find time to teach? Or an accountant, how do you find time for those balance sheets? Or a doctor, how do you find time to see your patients? It's your profession. It's what I do for a living. It's what I spend 50 hours a week doing. And I think there's a sense, because you can write on the side, that it's sort of a hobby. That can be, it's not frustrating. It's a question I just answer. Well, it's my job. I take it seriously. I have to meet my deadlines and make my publisher happy and keep my readers on schedule with reading a book every 2 years and so forth. But I think it sort of cuts to the answer to your question can be gleaned within the framework of that question, because it's a scary prospect of writing a book every 2 years. For me, I'm a slow writer, and I'm a bit of a perfectionist. You can't write a perfect book in 18 months. I could always make the book better if I had more time. I have to eventually turn it in. I have to be practical in the same way that a doctor might wish they had more time with a patient, or a teacher might wish they could spend more time with every one of their students. I mean, at some point you have to be practical. I have many sleepless nights wondering if I'll make the deadline, if I'll tell a story that anyone wants to read. It gets harder and not easier, which isn't to say that I'm not aware of how lucky I am, because I am, and I feel grateful to readers and so forth. But at the same time, it's really hard for me to face that fear and the blank page and to keep going. And of course, now I'm at the point when the book's coming out in a few days, and will people like it? Will they be happy with it? The sentence that strikes the most fear in my heart, and one that I fear but also motivates me, is the one that we've all said about our favorite musicians and writers, and I liked her old stuff. I liked his old stuff. I liked their old stuff. Oh, I can't think of a worse sentence. I mean, it's one thing to say my favorite book was the one she wrote 6 years ago, but I never want for my readers to feel that I'm just mailing it in. I always want to keep telling stories that I feel are as good or better than the one before it.
That pressure that you feel, is it the pressure of creative expression, or is it the pressure of maintaining a business enterprise?
I think it's both. For me, it's more the former, because you need the former to have the latter. But what I've always said is, I sense that you're the same way, but a type A, goal-driven person where you can study. If you're studying for a history test in college, or a law school exam, or you're preparing a brief, the hours that you put in have a direct impact on the product that comes out. You study harder, you're more likely to get the A. You write the brief for longer, it's going to be a better brief. And the thing about creative enterprises, and certainly writing novels, is you could spend, sometimes the harder I work, it's the greatest danger of something not working, because you get that fear and you're like, I'm going to put in 12 hours today and I'm going to write this chapter, and I'm not going to eat or get up from this chair until I've have something to show for it. And it doesn't work that way. And it does work that way in so many other things, and in my former life as a student and a lawyer. So that can be frustrating.
Emily, your novels explore the emotional lives of your characters. Do you think melancholy is necessary for good art?
I don't. That's such a good question. I remember one of my favorite authors is Eleanor Lippman. And she's been sort of a literary hero of mine since my mother read her when I was in junior high. I picked her up in high school, and I've read her ever since. And she's become a friend, which is surreal to me. When she wrote me her first letter, I sent her a book, and she wrote a letter back to me. It was as if George Clooney had showed up on my doorstep. The fangirling out that Elizabeth Lippman had read my book. But I remember she had this great quote before I think I'd ever published a novel, and it said, I will not, I'm paraphrasing, of course, but it was something along the lines of, I will not have my characters staring into an abyss for the sake of literary coolness. And I just love that. And I leave my characters in hopeful endings. And I think I have a positive outlook on life for the most part, even when I'm feeling dark. Ultimately, I'm hopeful. And I think my characters, I leave them in hopeful places. So I could certainly leave them in darker, worse places, bring more melancholy into my story. And in fact, I'll share with you that this epilogue, when I first wrote it, Nina died at the end. So I guess I'm telling my readers now, Nina does not die, which is not so much, it's not a spoiler. Eventually she will die. We all will, but she doesn't die within this novel or its epilogue. And my boys, I came upstairs, I finished the book, I sent it to my sister. She read it first. She loved Nina dying. She thought it was just like brilliant, and she cried, and she loves being sad. And my boys said, you can't do that to Nina. I'm like, well, people die all the time. It's realistic. Like, look at this is, and they said, oh, but you can't, what's the point? And I remember thinking, what do you have to accomplish to kill off your character? And my 13-year-old boys said that they've never read any of my books. And ultimately I came around, not because they said that, but I ultimately came around and saying, okay, the book isn't better because there's tragedy thrown in.
Emily, when it's 2 a.m., and you can't sleep, and you're not thinking about your book.
Okay.
What's on your mind?
Wanting to go back to sleep, first and foremost. Counting down the hours that I have left to, if I fell asleep in the following minute, how much sleep would I get? How much would it impact? All the normal anxiety that people feel with insomnia. I do the worst thing, the thing that everyone tells you not to do when you wake up in the middle of the night. Well, I do two of the things that people tell you not to do when you wake up in the night. I go and have a bowl of cereal, which you're not supposed to do, right? Frosted Mini Wheats, usually, sometimes a little shot of whiskey with the Frosted Mini Wheats. But also I get on my phone, which, because I'm thinking like, okay, I'm not going to turn on the lights and sit up and read a book, which I have not read it from an e-reader yet, but I'll read the news, which is, that's a guarantee that you won't go back to sleep anytime soon. So I would say politics or the news of the day is what's on my mind at 3 a.m. oftentimes.
Emily, let's talk about you. Is there a formative experience you remember about your childhood?
Oh, one of the formative experiences is, although I'm from Chicago, my father worked for Sears, which is why we ended up, the Sears headquarter still is, although it's not in the Sears Tower anymore. I'd say it was moving around a lot. He would take one job and then we'd be there 2 or 3 years and then we'd move somewhere else. And that really, I think that I was always a reader. I loved to read, loved to write, but I think that made me love books even more because I was constantly sort of readjusting to a new world. And there was great comfort in, these characters who felt like friends when it was sometimes so hard and arduous to make new friends. And so I think that really informed a lot of like who I became in terms of being a reader and a writer and a thinker. Not always a deep thinker, but and certainly an overthinker.
You have a sister who is special to you. Tell me about her.
Oh, Sarah is, she's 1 year older than I, and we are, we're best friends. We're very different in some ways, but in the most important ways, we're so similar. We can read each other, with one glance. We have very similar ideas about, people and the world. And she's, she was someone that was right there with me. I mean, there's something about siblings. I mean, it's really the cradle to the grave if we're lucky. And we share this tremendous history, and you don't have to sort of explain. Think how often when you meet someone new, whether a relationship or a friend, how long it takes to sort of catch them up. And your siblings know all of that, and they share your perspective in some ways a lot more than even your parents do, because you're sort of going through something together.
Is there a character in your novels whose childhood most closely mirrors your own?
I would say her personality doesn't closely mirror mine, but in a lot of ways, Rachel in my first book. And I've read sometimes that tends to be the one that feels the most like you. I certainly could relate to her in a lot of ways. The main difference being my decision to leave the law and go write full time was sort of her decision to pursue this romantic relationship, because I thought it was a little more interesting for readers to read about this love triangle than it was about someone simply leaving their law firm that they hated. But she did hate her law firm as well. But she came from a middle class, maybe slightly upper middle class background. She's a Midwestern girl, type A, rule following, all the things that I think that I was, and in some ways still am. Although I try to break some of those molds and take more risks.
Is that how your friends would have described you in high school?
Oh, I think for sure. Yeah, I was the, editor of the newspaper and in all the honors classes. And, I wasn't quite like Tracy Flick's student government, but definitely was like more quiet, creative writer. But I had friends in all different groups. And I think that aspect of my personality has enabled me to write about very different people, because I've never sort of been in one group. I've never been a person who's been in, one clique or followed one sort of, I played soccer. So I had my soccer friends, and then my creative writing club friends, and my academic friends. A lot of us can relate to that, but I definitely was like that. But they would probably say that I was a lot like Rachel.
Emily, you went to Wake Forest University.
I did.
What comes to mind when you think about Wake?
Basketball, college basketball. In fact, when we rolled up here, I was the basketball manager at Wake Forest. I wrote to the coaches before I was accepted into the university and said, I want to be the basketball manager. And they said, well, if you are, we were the basement of the ACC at the time, so I don't think they had a lot of job applications. And they said, if you get into school here, the job's yours. So I applied early decision, and it was the only school I applied to, and I went there for 4 years, and I was a basketball manager, and it was a huge part. 40, 50 hours a week of my life was spent with the basketball team in some capacity or another. But when we rolled into town, I said, I love this city. It reminds me of losing in the first round of the ACC tournament, though. In 1994, we were a number 1 or 2 seed. We had beaten Duke twice that year and Carolina at least once, and we still lost in the first round of the ACC tournament, which always coincided with spring break. So there you are on spring break. All your friends are at the beach. You're at the ACC tournament, which is vastly more appealing to me, but not so much when you lose in the first round.
And there was a very prominent basketball player at Wake at the time, wasn't there?
Yes. Well, Tim Duncan was actually a freshman when I was a senior. And Coach Odom, now retired, but he was the coach at the time, reminds me often that I said, oh, I don't really see Tim Duncan here at school. So fortunately, he wasn't taking my recruiting advice. And I love Tim, and I'm friends with him now. But yeah, certainly he was a special player. But we had a lot of special players.
You went to the University of Virginia School of Law. What did you learn as a law student that helped you eventually as a novelist?
Well, they say, as you know, since you went to law school, they say it teaches you how to think, right, critically. And I think there's certainly part of that. But I think that's partly why I wanted to go to law school, because I sort of thought like that. I was analytical to begin with. And I think so there is some overlap between the practice of law and the study of law and creative writing in some ways, because you're looking at things from all angles and you're, overthinking and so I would say that was all sort of consistent. That's been consistent in that legal side and the creative side. But there's always something that you use from law school. It's amazing to me how often, whether it's a very practical contract law issue or, understanding something, in criminal law, you use it all the time. And it does teach you how to think more critically. And it's just the most fascinating 3 years. I mean, I loved constitutional law. Like, that was my favorite class that I probably ever took at any level, college or law school. And I'm so passionate and emotional about the Constitution, as like very nerdy as that sounds.
You practiced law in Manhattan.
I did, if you can call it that. I practiced law. I did a lot of document reviews, though, to be honest. So that's the very lowly, for those, I mean, it's obvious by the description, document review, but for those who aren't former lawyers in the litigation department of a large firm, there's a lot of discovery that you do. Two of the big clients cases that I worked on were Philip Morris and GE. So there was a lot of going to warehouses and just looking through documents for an insurance relitigation. Mark any document that says Lloyd's of London in it. You flag it, and you're sitting in this like freezing cold warehouse in Syracuse, New York. And at some point you're like, okay, guys, let's just spot check this side of the warehouse because this is never going to trial. I'm kidding, sort of. There's probably a little bit of malpractice happening, but
5 years of complex litigation that gets settled on the courtroom steps.
Of course it is. Yeah, totally will. So to say that I practiced law, I mean, I did take a few. I was assigned. I was given a few smaller cases that were exciting, but I would say the vast majority of the 5 years I practiced law were spent tagging documents in warehouses.
How soon did you know that you wanted to do something else?
Day one. And that's not to say that, when did you know? Day one. I'm like, what have I got myself into? I don't know if you had law school loans, but I had law school loans. So I'm like, I need to at least pay these off before I'm an indentured servant for the next so many years before I can even, consider the possibility of leaving. I still remember the dean of the law school, the first day we were there, and saying, be mindful of following the next rung on the ladder and trying to achieve for the sake of achievement. In law firms, at the time it was the mid 90s and, things were going pretty well. And he said, employers and law firms will literally be scattering flowers at your feet. And the reason I know these words is because I actually taped them with a mini tape recorder and replayed them later and typed up the transcript. I do not know why I did this, but I still have it written down. It was just a little auditorium welcome to the law school thing. I think I was so emotional and moved by being in law school and accepted at this great university, and that I recorded a lot of it. But I didn't know what he meant at the time. And looking back, I know exactly what he meant at the time. And of course, I'm sure you do too, in that, you take the job that you feel is the most prestigious and that will pay the most money. And you have these loans and you're like, well, this one's harder to get. So surely I want this one. So I always have to be careful when I'm talking to young people who say, should I go to law school? Yes. The answer is yes. Go to law school if you want to go to law school, and you won't regret law school, but be mindful of your decisions you make upon graduation.
Emily, most of your novels are set in Manhattan. What does New York City add as an element in your storytelling?
Well, we all know what New York City adds. There's a reason that it's so popular for fiction and movies. I mean, it's where people are fascinated by the vibrancy and diversity and the energy of New York City. And certainly I felt that when I lived there. That's another reason I'm glad I went to law school. I don't think that I would have gone to move to New York without for me personally, plenty of people do, and I admire them greatly, but I don't think I would have moved to New York without the security of this, white shoe law firm salary and so I'm grateful for that, to law school for that. But I love New York and I learned so much, and I met so many people who are still a part of my life all these years later. And I think that New York resonates with everyone, even those who haven't lived there. People can relate to that as a character.
In 2001, you made a decision that changed your life. You're a lawyer in the world. This is your identity. These are who your friends are. This is how you are perceived. And you walked away from it. Take me to that moment emotionally.
Well, there was so much to that. I think, as I mentioned earlier, part of it is that misery motivates us, right? So I don't get a lot of credit for being brave because I really hated him. I couldn't wait to get out of that law firm, even though I had dear friends there and loved living in New York. I really couldn't wait to get out of it. So there was part of that, like I must escape this just this environment. So there was part of that. Part of it was I was turning 30 at the same time, which, looking back, and when I hear people talk about turning 30, it's something that it's like 30 is nothing. 30 is nothing. But at the time, it's all relative. It's all what you're feeling in that moment. And to me, turning 30, and I was, 29 and single, and I did feel a sense of panic about, if I don't do it now, I'll never do it. So there was that sense. There was great fear of the unknown, and in particular, fear of, and I really drew on this when I wrote Something Borrowed and told Rachel's story, but fear of failure. The very simple fear of failure can really paralyze us. I remember the last day of my law firm, a partner named, I'll just tell you, his first name is Bob. And I did not like him. I did not care for him. None of the associates, we collectively hated him. I'll say it more honestly. We couldn't stand Bob. And as I left, on this last day, I had my box of, of course I had several trips from files that I took out of my office, but this was like my last banker's box of items. And I walked to the elevator, and he happened to be passing by, and he did that little clicking thing with the double holster guns, like that. And he said, hey, you're leaving to write a book? Good luck with that novel. Like the little click. In other words, like smirk, everyone's, or I think he even said everyone's writing a book. And I thought, chances are great. I mean, they're way higher that I'm not going to publish a book than I am. And then Bob is going to find out, and it's going to be embarrassing. And what if I have to come back here? And so that was definitely part of my mindset. But it's so important to not let those fears to guide us.
I hope you sent Bob an autographed copy.
Yeah, I never did. If he ended up dying of a heart attack at the firm. I mean, it's horrible. But it's Bob died.
In Something Blue,
okay,
Darcy and Richard played a game called Psychiatrist. Is writing characters a way for you to play psychiatrist?
I think yes. I think decidedly yes. Not that I'm playing psychiatrist necessarily, but whenever I'm asked what profession would you want, I think that I would be really good at that. And I have so many, people in my inner circle who call me for that advice, which isn't to say that I get it right at all in my own life. They're not calling me because they think I have this excellent track record of my own personal decision making, but I really love breaking things down, analyzing, giving advice. And advice really to me isn't necessarily like a directive. It's more just getting to the person's gut feeling. Should I break up with this person? Well, let's talk about that. Like, what's your gut tell you? Rather than just like, yes, I don't like him. It's not that simple, which is what psychiatrists do. And I think what I'm doing as the writer of my book in many ways, because there's so much gray area.
Do you write characters as types, as personalities that readers can instantly recognize?
Well, I try not to, of course, but the honest answer is I think my characters do start out as types, with the belief that the confidence in myself, the hope that they won't end up as types. In the same way that when I meet someone new, or when we all meet someone new, we tend to put them in a category. And as we get to know them, that falls away. They still might fall into a category of like, jock or, the frat boy or whatever. But most of the people that we really nurture our closest relationships with are composites, or more nuanced than that. And as I get to know my characters, just as I get to know people in real life, they become less exaggerated and more nuanced. And I hope that at the close of any novel, when someone sort of closes the book and puts it down, they don't feel that any of my characters are types.
Emily, you've written that part of getting what you want in life means losing something else.
When did I write that? I don't remember that, but I think it's true.
In
right?
getting what you've wanted, becoming a best-selling novelist, what have you lost?
Well, I'll say I don't remember where I said that, whether it was in fiction or in one of my characters said it or whether I said it, but I do believe that this notion of having it all, it doesn't exist. And I think it's a dangerous one. You hear it a lot, I think, with working women in particular, like, oh, you can have it all. You can work and you can also be a mother, and you can't have it all because you always give up certain things to have others. And life is all about those choices and compromises. I mean, I don't have it all because I'm not, I'm in Charlotte now and my sons are at a track meet that I'm missing. And when you're a working person, you miss parts of your child's lives. And so that's certainly not having it all. And so from the standpoint of being a working mother and having a profession and one that I'm passionate about and one that's time consuming, I've had to give up things that I'm sad about at moments. Although my daughter is coming to 7 of the cities with me on this book tour. She's 11, so she still likes it. So it can't last for much longer. As far as more specifically, I think you're asking about, being a published writer. Am I right? Yeah. So from that standpoint, so there's more broadly speaking, just being a working person. Yeah, no, I think that the more successful you are in this particular endeavor, maybe this is true with all professions, but I haven't given it as much thought as I have my own. But the more sort of commercially successful you are, the more pressure there is, and the more that your life. I mean, I'm certainly no writer except for maybe J.K. Rowling or John Grisham, Stephen King. There's a few who I would consider celebrities. No writers are. I joke often that we're automatically like D-listers at best. So it's not that I have no privacy, that people recognize me in the street or anything, but you open your life to a certain extent to criticism and analysis. For one, in your fiction, there's going to be people who don't like your books, people who confuse the first person with me. I can't believe you said this. Well, I never said that. A character who I was writing in the first person said that. You write a murder mystery in the first person. It doesn't mean that you have a dead body in your trunk. So I think there's that element, but also because I'm open on social media and because I think that's where our world is right now in terms of, a lot of artists share their lives. If you're honest, you're going to attract criticism. If you're going to be authentic in your fiction or on social media with your readers, you're going to attract criticisms. You have to have a thicker skin. And that there's a trade-off there because it can hurt your feelings, or you can feel exposed, or you can feel like you're, oversharing your children's lives or, your personal life. But that's a decision that I've made consciously, hopefully carefully, and one that I've talked to them about. And I think for me, it's more important to be authentic and to share that than it is to, I guess just to fake it.
Is there something you still want in your life that you don't have?
I guess I want more of the things that I love. I want more time with the people I love. I want there to be more books within me. I want to keep writing. If I could keep sort of everything the way it is now. Of course, we all evolve and change, and I want to see my children grow, but no, I mean, there's nothing that I feel is missing right now, but there's a great fear in that too, right? Because I keep saying to my kids things like, these are the good old days, right? And I'm so nostalgic and I'm so worried about time passing by that in some ways that's what I want. I want things to go by a little more slowly.
Emily, you've said relationships define who we are and what we want in our lives. Can you imagine a protagonist of yours who is alone and fulfilled?
A protagonist of mine or a protagonist in my fiction? No, I can't. I can't. I mean, I think and really in real life, everyone needs someone. They just need it in different ways. They need different sorts of relationships and they need different levels of social interaction. But no, I can't imagine writing about such a person because it's the relationship there's your internal workings and how you feel, but it's all sort of comes down to relationships in the end, I think.
What matters most to you?
I mean, the people in my life, that's so easy. My children and, my friends, my family, my husband, the people in my life, that's what matters most. That's what's the most precious. And that's why you're able to sort of, for me, keep everything, a sense of balance over my career and what I'm doing. And the sales might be up or down, or, one book might get, better reviewed or more poorly reviewed than another, but ultimately none of that matters. Nobody's thinking about those things in the final analysis of life. Nobody, no matter how much of a workaholic or how ambitious or how successful. Steve Jobs was not thinking about that in the end. I can't believe that he was. Maybe he was thinking about I'm sure he was thinking about his vision for what he created, but more important, you're thinking about your relationships.
Is there something you think we all universally yearn for?
Well, sure. I think we all want to be loved and accepted for who we are. And I think that's why we get into so much trouble, because we're afraid that our true selves, we won't be loved or accepted for our true selves. So we fall into these traps of trying to make these decisions and carve our life, lead these lives where we think people will approve. And of course, part of that is being loyal to people. So I'm not advocating a selfish existence, where you're only thinking about what you want and who you are. There's a balance to that. But I think when it comes right down to it, we want to be seen for who we are. We want to be accepted. And even more than accepted, we want to be loved.
Thanks for your time today, Emily.
Thank you. That was such a good conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Emily Giffin is the author of All We Ever Wanted and 8 previous New York Times bestselling novels. She earned a bachelor's degree in history and in English from Wake Forest University and a JD from the University of Virginia School of Law. And now, a personal word. I haven't read any novels by Jane Austen. I haven't read any stories by the Bronte sisters. I did read In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. I did not read Breakfast at Tiffany's. The whole genre of women's literature, tales of love and loss in the English countryside, to single women trying to make it in the big metropolis, have not been on my bedside table. I have seen my share of romantic comedies. My absolute favorite is The Breakup with Jennifer Aniston and Vince Vaughn. But they're not first on my list when I go to the movies. All of which is to say, when a friend of mine mentioned that a friend of hers worked for Emily Giffin, I responded blankly. Emily's name did not register at all. Then I received a notice from our local library that Emily would be on a book tour through town. I saw it as a sign. Wouldn't it be great to have her as a guest of the podcast and learn more about her? I reached out to her publicist and did not hear anything back until the day before her visit. Suddenly, I was scheduled to meet Emily. That gave me one night to read her work. I went to Barnes & Noble and sat down with her first 8 novels, all pretty covers in blue and pink. I set out to preview them quickly. I read for structure and themes. I looked for sentences that I could bring back to my discussion with Emily. But as I fell into the stories and characters and dialogue, I was struck by how captivating they were to read. I remember putting my pen down and getting comfortable in an oversized chair and enjoying them for what they were, really engaging stories about people that seemed genuine to me. Emily writes about characters who are taken by surprise, who confront moral dilemmas, who are tested and become better versions of themselves. I'm curious about what this means for Emily. I noticed a progression in her writing From stories about single young women whose lives revolve around a man, to stories about more complicated women and men managing marriages and commitments and conflicting demands. Her first book, Something Borrowed, is listed among the classic stories of female friends navigating loyalty and love. Her latest book moves toward different terrain, toward issues of class and race and identity. She is teeing up subjects that challenge happy endings and whether love conquers all. I wonder if Emily's on the verge of something new. I wonder where her writing is going. I wonder how brave she will be. The great joy of this podcast for me is sitting across from my guests, observing them, listening to them, being with them. In every conversation, I see myself in my guests and my guests in me. With Emily, almost from the moment she walked into the room, I felt we were versions of each other. As she told her story, I could sense the next part of it, as if the story were my own. We both moved frequently as children, adjusting to new people and circumstances. We both found comfort in reading and writing. We developed private, introspective lives while learning to make new friends. Like Emily, I wrote relationship-driven stories that I shared in handcrafted booklets with my name proudly on the cover. Like her, I got along with people from all walks of life, with athletes, artists, musicians, and classmates interested in business, science, medicine, and the law. In college, Emily and I both majored in history, a reading and writing discipline about choice and consequence, context and narrative. Emily and I both went to law school to read and write some more. The law is about people and society. Every case is a set of facts and principles. Case law is story and precedent, all grist for writing novels. I loved law school. I loved learning. I loved my friends, just as Emily did. After law school, I clerked on a federal court of appeals. Then came the next rung on the ladder of achievement, a prestigious, high-paying national law firm. And on the first day, just as Emily did too, I knew I had entered a soul-sucking, mind-numbing, morally compromised world. Emily lived in Manhattan. I lived in Miami. We both were sent off to warehouses and document review. We both worked for partners we couldn't stand. Emily plotted her escape, writing her first manuscript. I did the same. She found an agent. I did too. Emily's first novel was rejected. She moved to London and wrote her second manuscript about a love triangle and secrets and the charge of electricity between two people. I wrote my manuscript about a love triangle and secrets and the charge of electricity between two people. And it is at this point that our stories diverge. Her novel was about love and friendship. Mine was psychological suspense. Emily's novel was published and became a sensation. My agent wanted to sell the movie rights first and then the literary rights, but it stalled and went unpublished. Emily has since written 8 more best-selling novels. Over the last many years, my energies shifted to business and investments and media and education. All of this was on my mind as I sat across from Emily. What would her life be today if her manuscript never sold? What would she have created for herself? What would my life be today if my story had sold? What would I have done and not done? We both are interested in choices. We both are interested in good lives. Is she happy with her life? She is. Am I happy with my life? I am. And here we are, 2 lives, now connected. Here is what I sense about Emily. She will roll the dice to win big. She is productive and disciplined. She creates the life she wants to live. She is grateful for what has come her way. She is highly intuitive about people. She has more stories to tell, and I can't wait to read them. This is Mark Paris, and you've been listening to On Life and Meaning. Additional support for this podcast is provided by the UNC College of Arts and Architecture, celebrating a decade of creative education in the arts and design. Thank you to our funding partners, and to my teammates, Andy Go, producer of the show, and to Chris Curriton, art and media director. This is how you can help. Please write a review on iTunes. It helps us grow our audience. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We'd love to hear what you think about the show. And become a patron. We are on Patreon, a crowdsourcing platform that allows you to support what you value at a level you choose. Visit us also on our website on lifeandmeaning.com. Thank you for listening.